poem is called Ode to Buddy Gibson. This is my ode to you, Buddy. You heard it before. Your essence is a metaphor. For you represent the core of an apple that never rots. The longevity of your style goes way back to the tortilla flats. This tribute is more formal than when we say Buddy, because the term is used informally when addressing someone. Yet you are the sum of one, second to none, among the rarest of roots, like a sequoia, too massive to be blown over in the wind. Coexisting in a wildfire, you are the brick and mortar, the storyboard connecting love and country. A John Lewis of sorts, anchoring, quote, good trouble, end quote, with, quote, can we all just get along, end quote. Buddy, your pivot is hereditary. No one can compete in your Game of Thrones, so we knight you king to remind you of your deep wisdom and cheers. And his birthday was just last week, so happy birthday, Mr. Gibson.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started.
I didn't even know he thought about me the way he does, and he's a star within himself. And you know, when you reach back and say, well, I watched this guy grow up from a kid. My son was his coach at Wyoming High School. And I'm saying, wow, now he's a doctor, you know? And that makes me feel good to see that transition of time. The 60s were different than the 80s. The 80s were different than the 90s. And even up to where we are today. It's a different thinking. Our young people, we have to show them a way that we have a way of getting along with everybody and understanding our jobs, following our CEOs, helping them to complete their dreams and thoughts of how to run this county. When I came along, we had the Public Employees Association. One more story. This is a good one. Public Employees Association came along just at the same time that affirmative action came down within the county. That was to help kind of balance off the playing field for acceptance of all, you know, everyone is kind of on an equal basis for getting raises and things like that. The public employees was very interesting to me because I noticed I started getting more money on my paycheck, but it wasn't anything that was a raise as far as my position. But because I was getting more money, I was complaining and said, okay, that's fine. That's good. I'm getting more money. And they just kept fighting and fighting and fighting. So one day I asked one of the officers over there, say, what does it take to get into the Employees Association on the board? I'm bold. So he said, all you have to do is put your name down and we'll put you and see if people will vote for you. So I did. And I think in the department I was, some of the guys came up and says, you're going to run, I'm going to vote for you. But I don't really want to vote for you, but I'll vote for you because I'm going to vote for Bill. I said, oh, that's cool. Sounds good, you. Sounds good. So what happened, everybody had the same thought of whoever they wanted to vote for, they just throw me in there anyway. You know, and I said, well, that sounds good. I can at least go back to the community and say, I'm running for the Public Employees Association board. My community, they said, well, that's nice. And I said, well, that's the way to let them know that you're trying to strive to make things better. So at the end of the day, what happened was, although these others had to split the votes, my vote just came just like that. As a secondary vote. But the secondary vote won more votes than any one of them did. So I was happy with that. So I did the best I could. So I kept it quiet. Or if it wasn't quiet, it was like they couldn't believe it, so it didn't bother them. So that gave me, during the affirmative action time, when it was being implemented, and I could actually now access the actual insight of what was really going on and insight, because whatever had to happen, I was at this side where it had to happen, and by me knowing what should have happened, I could see if it was happening at the same time. And I could try and do some things by reporting back, and I don't want to call it a snitch. I want to call it an obligation of telling the truth and trying to get some things to happening as an apprentice. And so the board of supervisors, the ones that did know me, they knew I was doing activities in other cities, trying to make things better. And I took a lot of hits. I mean, it was like, you ask why do certain people do the things they do when it's not even necessary. So one of the things I liked about it was I was able to do one more thing, and I have to apologize to the CEO because she had to hear this, but I sued the county. I sued the county in federal court. And at the end of that, I actually was told that I won the case. But what was different about it at that time is that a single employee in a federal or government job was most likely not to win, because class action was a new thing that were coming in. If there was enough people to prove the point, it had more clout to it. And I understood that. But that was probably the end of my career here, but it didn't really bother me about that either, because right after that, the grand jury came out and did a double ditto that the county did have some problems. And that was worth it to me to sacrifice myself to bring out, to make something happen. So it's a hard way to go, but it was a good way to go. And my faith in religion, doing a lot of praying and praying for people, made a big difference in the way I walked after that. And so I just started doing more community work. I had all these skills that the county taught me. And it's hard to say that you have to gain these skills sometimes by sacrificing yourself, but it's worth it. I'm happy.
No,
Thank you so much for that. So,
Because you've done so much for the community. Not only did you work for a place that ended up he being a symbol within the place, people didn't really go to the colonial house a lot of times to go to the colonial house. They went to the colonial house to see Mr. Hackett. He had a cleaning team and waiting on the tables and just overall a great guy. So anyway, he told me, well, I'm 58. And I looked at him and I said, you know what? I'm not going to call you Mr. Hackett no more. Because I'm 90. But anyway, I was older than he was, and I never realized that he carried himself in such a way to help in the community that I always thought he was much older from his wisdom and things. So I appreciate knowing your father. Now to get back to that little guy that was out there. Well, I think when it first started off, it was what do you call this? A statue. A statue. But for some reason back in the day, they planted this statue at a business place right on Oxnard Boulevard, so everybody could see, to come and visit the establishment. But they painted jet black with, a cook. And then they had this automatic arm kind of going like this, and they had a handkerchief in it. And that was showing back then to me and people that I knew a sign of racism, because it had something to do with the type of people that lived in the community. Somebody was coming down a freeway and you just have to look over there to see this black thing going like this. So they said, well, that was kind of a code symbol to me. So eventually we got it painted to brown. And then I remember, I recall one day somebody did a little graffiti and turned it white. When it turned white, it disappeared. Because I think it brought back a certain element of embarrassment that they never noticed before. And I think that was kind of a turn in the history of this county and area. When that symbol disappeared, it actually brought people thinking a little bit of what it really represented when it had no symbolic symbol to say whatever it meant at that time. But I think it had something to do with a lot of the atmosphere in the county at that time. And so anyway, I was glad to know him. I was glad to see that he played a part of trying to get her taken down. And I did play with my band at the Colonial House in the dining room area a few times, and I always thought that the place was very nice to us. And I hate to see it come down, but I think the last thing that did come down was a fireplace. You know, it stood there for a long time as a symbol. And every time I go by, I mean, all these memories would come back. And I'm glad to see that as we go along through this whole county, that eventually things that represented certain things, that a diversity of dealing with color and relationships, are disappearing little by little, and that's rewarding to me. My work is, and I don't like to call it work. You know, I do things that I don't even think about. I just get in there, let's go. And so I appreciate that. And those who've never been to the Colonial House is one of the best places in Oxnard during its time. It served well.
Thank you so much. At this time, we have a question from one of our Zoom attendees. So we have two things. One is, I hope I'm not giving any secrets away, or somebody actually knows what they're talking about, but there's a big happy birthday to you on here. Is it your birthday?
Yeah.
His birthday was
February 13th. And it has a lot to do with a lot of African American Black history. I can remember Abraham Lincoln in thought. I think he was born in the year of that ended in 38. Lincoln ended up in 38. Let me see another good one. I was in 1938. I got a note here somewhere. It's good to know. I also, what did I do? I remember looking up some stuff. Oh yeah, another good one was, well, it's bad when you have to read your own writing. So anyway, 38 seems to be a good number for a lot of great people, things that happened along the way in history. And, oh yeah, my favorite was the Lone Ranger. Now, people say, what do you have to do with Lone Ranger? Well, in our home, we had a very clean house because I know I had to do the floor. And one way of being able to go to the movies or anything else was because you cleaned that floor so you could go on a weekend, you could go to the movies for 25 cents to see the Lone Ranger. And when I was growing up, I was the Lone Ranger. I remember after sweeping and everything, get everything done, hollering through the house that I had finished. They said, okay, just make sure you're in before sun goes down. I grab my little broom, throw a leg over it, get my hat, little cap guns, and off I'd go down the alleyway. Well, when I went to these movies to see The Lone Ranger, we listened to him quite a few years on the radio. I found out that the Lone Ranger came out on a white horse, and he had this, I think it was the eye goggles first, and they were black, and I said, wow, that's cool. And then a few years later, they started making out videos, CDs or something, and I remember seeing one of them. And then they took the video off, and he came out with a mask, and he was doing great. And I asked my father, I said, Dad, I thought you told me that the Lone Ranger was black. He says he was. I said, no. Walt Disney told me and showed us who the Lone Ranger was. So as I got older, I went into the library and I started looking up information. And come to find out that the Lone Ranger in history, and since it's black history, was Bass Reeves. A real, true, known legend with the title Legend, Lone Ranger.
Wow.
And that Walt Disney changed Lone Ranger's stories to make it more acceptable for selling. He put the Bass Reeves story, all of his stories of all his life. You have to look that up, Bass Reeves. It's going to really surprise you. He was the Lone Ranger and was a marshal back in the mid-1800s. And great story. They do have a movie out now, and some series, but it's not really like if you get the book. And they show you the book. And I thought I had to go back and apologize to my dad because I think it's the first time I got knocked down because I said the word liar. But I'll never forget that because that's what got me so interested in history and people themselves, because I felt that I went through a period of my life that was false. You know, people always ask, what does black history mean? Well, you have to analyze the word. History is made before you can talk about it. So when you look at history, to anybody, no matter whether it's black history or any kind of culture history, you can't really challenge something that had happened, that's been documented. There's nothing to challenge.
Wow.
So the history you made today yourselves is not going to be challenged. Can't be challenged because it happened. That's why they call it history. Now, as far as coming back to Ventura, I think that I've talked to a lot of people throughout the area in pretty good positions because my family has been left out of black history. And I'm talking about local black history. I have so much things and stuff that they have done before me, and I try to carry on their legacy. And my children taking on my legacy as I speak. So, thank you for that.
I'm going to try to squeeze two questions together, and you can pick which one you're going to answer. So one person that came through asked about, you had mentioned maybe that you were in the National Guard and they wanted to know more about that. And then another person shared a private chat to me that you mentioned the South has a lot of, Venture County has a lot of the same racism issues that the South had. And they were asking, we have the KKK here, and did you have any history related to the KKK in Ventura County?
No, I do not have any history to look at the KKK. But I can remember in my lifetime being able to go down to the NAACP, Mr. Hatcher, John Hatcher, called up staff, and I was part of the staff at that time, to come over to his house one morning, and in his yard, a cross was burnt in his lawn.
I remember.
And it had an impact to me and those who actually seen that. Now, you can't say it was the NAACP. I mean, it was the Ku Klux Klan, but the symbol was real. So, how do you go into a well-developed neighborhood, pour gas on somebody's lawn, sit and get a match, and get out of that neighborhood without anybody recognizing it unless they knew something about it?
Mm.
And the impact that it had at the time. So in my lifetime, yes. In my earlier days, I'd say in the 1940s, I remember coming out of a movie on Figueroa Street, I believe it was that, or Ventura Theater anyway. And it was about 5 of us, and we were going to go down to the park and shoot on home. We were all fast runners, and it was that night. So I remember I seen with my own eyes that we were getting out of the theater and started going across the parking lot, and 5 guys were standing off the side, and they were standing there in their long gowns with the hoods on their head, and we took off. But the thing to say about that, they must have been going to a meeting somewhere in the area, because they didn't bother us. It's just that we seen it, and it scared us so bad because of the stories we've heard. So that was here a lot. And I've heard stories of where they used to meet from my grandfather, my uncles. But we also know our perimeters. It's like modern day saying, stay in your lane.
Mhm.
And we did just that.
The other question was about your relationship to the National Guard. Is that something you want to share about?
Yes, I was in the Winter National Guards here in the 144th Armored Division. And I served in there for 8 years. Another way of saying that something that the county did not know at that time, that I was probably in that, but I remember I was started off as a cook. When we go meet and have meetings, and then I remember one day I had an opportunity of trying to get into be a tank driver, which was a 144 millimeter howitzer, self-propelled, driven. And I also remember that I made marksmanship with an M1, which was very unusual for a young man to have the skills to do that. And after I was learning how to cook, that's what they said. My mother already taught me how to cook. So I was coming up with grits and stuff for, whatever I could, especially when we went to the field. And it was really nice in the years, and I remember one of the highlights was once I mastered the skills of being able to drive this big tank. And you go up to Hunter or Camp Comfort is where I did all of my training when we had the, used the tanks. And I remember that we always would say that being as part of this unit, we had to learn and get along with each other from a perspective of getting a job done, whatever we had to do. So one of the good things I liked about it was that one day they had some kind of a parade down Main Street. And how it happened, I don't know, but they asked me would I drive that tank down the middle of Main Street. And I was a little tiny guy too, but I could handle it, so I told him I would. And I didn't realize what that meant to people here in Ventura, from my neighborhood, and just people throughout, because they were just cheering, and it kind of brought the life back to the parade, you know, that here I am, I'm waving like I just came back from a war or something. I really had a good time with that, and I do have a picture of that now, and that was a lot of fun to see that. But anyway, yes, I drove that tank, and I had to learn how to maintenance that tank. So whoever asked the question, thank you for the question. I had a ball.
We have time for one more question.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say, hold on, we need to make sure our Zoom folks here. I just wanted to say that,
So I read your book, I bought your book, or you gifted it to me, and I read it, and when I read the book, I was shocked to find that some of your ancestors and your family or history in the city of Ventura, in the Negro quarters, and I apologize that I heard it, so I didn't hear you talk about the Negro quarters, which was either in and around the tortilla flats. That Anne was the one responsible for introducing my parents. And I thought that was like amazing. And so my question to you is, you talk a lot about the history of peoples and your families and the community and all that you've done, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about your childhood, specifically when you were a child performer. I've always thought that that was extremely amazing.
so I'm just gonna repeat your question.
What really stood out to her in terms of reading your book was the context of tortilla flats. She also noted how her parents actually met there. Is that correct?
No, that his history in the Negro quarters inside of the tortilla flats, that his relative Ann helped introduce my parents.
Oh, your relatives helped to introduce her parents and ultimately her being here. Which is powerful. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch that my train of thought kind of left, and that question was.
And
Oh, Anne.
Ann was a relative.
Anne. Oh, Anne.
Ann was his relative.
Oh, and it was his relative. Oh, so you're all related.
no.
we're not
And
Oh,
ANN.
is it Anne?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm in trouble. I hope I'm in trouble.
This is fun part of the ball. Nobody rookie here.
Sorry, I just want to say your relative Ann was the one who was responsible for introducing my parents.
Yes.
So, I just wanted to say that I appreciate you being here. I always lift up your name to anybody I can to say, hey, this is true history, true living history for the city of Ventura. I was born and raised in the city of Ventura, and as you know, a lot of people of color were raised in Oxnard, and I'm kind of a little bit of an anomaly. So to be able to hear the stories about the place where I grew up, where Black people actually existed, when I was raised, I didn't know there was a Negro quarters that ever existed in the city of Ventura. So I read your book. You gifted it to me when we had lunch one day, and I just wanted to ask you to talk more about that part of your history, which is you being a child performer, which I've always thought was amazing.
Thank you. Okay. Started about 5 years old, singing in the front row of the pew, not knowing I was singing loud. My mother was an accomplished pianist, had played for a couple of churches, and one of the persons that should have been singing a lead on a song didn't show up. And I knew it, so I'm just going along like that and saying it. My mom told me to raise my voice, and I did, and started singing it. She said, okay, you're in the choir next Sunday. So that was the starting of my career, and what happened was my mother was a pioneer within her own rights. She took a lot of hits as an African American woman,